Welcome, my name is Chef Cosmo and today we're gonna make fresh pasta from scratch. So there's a few ways to make fresh pasta. We can use what I call the by hand method, which is classic, old school. We can also use the food processor method, which is just a little bit faster. Some people would say that, you know, one was better than the other, but I would challenge anyone in a blind taste test to tell me the difference. So having said that, not everyone has a food processor. We're gonna do the by hand method. So when I do the by hand method now, I use a bowl. You may have seen it at some point with this, you know, mound of flour on the cutting board and a moat made and then eggs cracked in the middle. Well, we're gonna do the same thing but in a bowl. And the reason why I do it in a bowl is that I was in a competition once and we were on a farm and we were collecting eggs from the fields. And I had a young guy working with me and he was quite nervous. There was about 300 people watching us and he had a very small space to work with. And he said, I don't know, he had to make the pasta dough. He said, can I do it in a bowl? And I kind of laughed and I said, sure, do it in a bowl. And then as I was watching him, I thought to myself, why don't we always do it in a bowl? You can spin the bowl, everything stays in the bowl. Anyways, now I always do it in a bowl. So we're gonna do it in a bowl. Okay, so we're gonna put 1.5 cups of flour and we're gonna make a little divot here, a little indent for our eggs to go in. It's 1 egg per 3/4 cup flour is the ratio, so we're gonna do 2 eggs for 1.5 cups of flour. Then we're gonna put in a pinch of salt, a little dollop of olive oil, and the one thing that I do differently is a lot of pasta recipes, they don't call for the addition of water. Now what I find is that, you know, sometimes what throws people off of making fresh pasta is they end up with a dry dough that's very difficult to work. And it makes them feel that they've done something wrong, that it's difficult, it's hard to knead and hard to roll out. And then if it's too dry, it's difficult to knead water into a dry dough, but it's very easy to knead flour into a wet dough. So it's easier to put a little water in and then knead some flour in if it's too wet than than in reverse, okay? So we're gonna add about 2 tablespoons of water. And you can see this breach here. Now, the fact that it's in a bowl doesn't matter, whereas if this was on the counter, you'd be trying to gather up that liquid. So I'm gonna put the fork in the middle and I'm gonna mix. And you can see I can spin the bowl now. And I want to keep this together in the center rather than haphazardly just kind of mixing the whole thing and then bringing it together at the end. I like to keep it together as I'm mixing so that I can get a really smooth, consistent dough. And you'll see that having it in the bowl now contains it and allows for me to spin it around and get a good even mix. You can see how smooth that looks. It's beautiful. So we want to keep that together until the point when this pulls away from the bottom, and then we can turn it out onto the counter and work it with our hands. Get my hands a little floury, smooth that off. And then now just gently start working it. At first it's going to feel very soft and sticky, so we want to cover it with flour so that it doesn't stick to our hands. And then we're going to start to feel a little bit of a rhythm forming where we can then apply just this kneading technique where we're going to do a 1/4 turn, fold to the center, and push in with the butt of our hand. 1/4 turn, fold, push. 1/4 turn, fold, push. Now I'm left-handed, So if you're right-handed, do everything that I'm doing in reverse. Okay, and I can kind of try that, so let's see, I'm gonna try it right-handed. So we're gonna do quarter turn, fold, push. Quarter turn, fold, push. Quarter turn, fold, push. And that feels uncomfortable, so I'm gonna go back to the left-handed version. And then you keep just dusting with flour as needed. And this is a stretching, not a tearing motion. So we wanna push when we're kneading and stretch, because we're stretching out and making these gluten strands, the elasticity of this dough nice and long. We're not trying to like mash it and tear it. So we're doing nice, gentle pushes and lengthening and stretching and creating elasticity in our dough. If it starts to feel sticky, we're gonna dust it. And we're gonna keep doing this for about 5 or 10 minutes. And they say that the longer you do this, the better the dough. But I think 5 or 10 minutes is plenty. So we've been kneading and kneading and kneading and kneading and kneading. And I've pretty much gathered up all the flour on the board. Now I'm gonna wrap this beautiful dough and we're gonna let it set in the fridge for 20 minutes. So we did the by hand method. Now we're gonna do the food processor method for making a fresh egg pasta dough. Same ratios. We've got 1.5 cups of flour. We're gonna put in 2 eggs. Pinch of salt. Bit of olive oil. And I'm gonna hold off on the water until we see the moisture content of the eggs. So we're doing the by hand method. We put a little water in right at the beginning, but with the food processor it happens very quickly, so we can see all eggs are different in their water content, different sizes. So when we say 2 eggs to 1.5 cups of flour, it's gonna be variable how much water content is in each egg. So we're gonna run it and then we're gonna add a little water. Okay, so I can see that it's not fully pulling together. I'm gonna add a little bit of water and get it to do what I call the magic. Let's see if it's gonna do it. Oh, it looks like it's gonna do it. There we go. So when it all balls up together like that, that's what I call the magic. And so that is a quick and dirty way to make a egg pasta dough with 0 hand kneading. Now some people could might take this out and in theory want to do some hand kneading as well. But honestly, I've made this so many times just like this, and just wrap that and set it in the fridge. And like I said before, I would challenge anyone to a blind taste test to be able to tell me the difference between this dough fast in the food processor and a by hand method dough. So you can see a beautiful soft texture, it's well mixed, and we're gonna wrap that as well and put that in the fridge for 20 minutes. So we've made the egg pasta dough by hand. We've made one basic one in the food processor. And now that you've learned the basics, now we can play around a little. So we're gonna make a couple of colored doughs. We're gonna make one with spinach, so a green dough, and we're gonna make one with beets, a nice pink dough. The ratio is a little bit different. So instead of 1.5 cups of flour to 2 eggs, we're gonna use 1 cup of flour to 1 egg to 1 egg-sized chunk or clump of cooked vegetables. Now, we're using spinach and beets. It could also be squash or anything else that you like. So we're gonna add a cup of flour, 1 egg, 1 egg-sized chunk of steamed squozen, I made that word up, chopped and rolled spinach. Pinch of salt, a little bit of olive oil. We're gonna hold off on the water on this as well. We're gonna wait to see how much water content is in the spinach. If we need to add some water, we will, but we may not. We're gonna let all the moisture come out of the spinach before we make that call on whether we need any water. It's looking pretty good. Now the food processor allows us to do this as well. You couldn't necessarily knead chopped spinach into a dough by hand and get the same result, because you're gonna have chunks which are gonna break the dough later on in the process. Okay, so this dough looks perfect. It's not balling up exactly like the other one, but I can tell by the texture. And if we're gonna pull a little bit out and just press it together, we can tell that that's a beautiful consistency. So we're gonna ball that up and again wrap it, set it in the fridge for about 20 minutes and move on to the beet pasta dough. Okay, so we've got our egg pasta dough and our spinach pasta dough resting in the fridge. Now we're gonna do a bright pink beet pasta dough. This one's my daughter's favorite. Same thing, we're gonna do a cup of flour, 1 egg, a pinch of salt, a little bit of olive oil, and an egg-sized scoop of cooked and pureed beets. Again, we're not going to add any water yet. We're going to see if there's enough moisture within the beets and the egg to bring this together. Right away we get that beautiful color. You can tell the moisture is good by the way it starts to bind up already. Yeah, this is going to be good. And we might even get the magic with this one. It's pushing along, it wants to roll. There it goes. There we go, we got the magic on that one. And so, you know, some people like to, you know, make fresh pasta out to be far more complicated than it is. It is a very simple process. I actually like to think a lot of things in cooking are simple if you know how to do them, okay? So now you know how to do it, you can make fresh pasta by hand. And, you know, my thought is that once you know how to do this, you could come home, you could put on a fresh pot of water, make a sauce, make a pasta dough, let it rest, cut it, boil noodles, and be eating fresh pasta with a fresh marinara probably within an hour, hour and 15 minutes. Now we're gonna wrap this up and let this set with the other 2 doughs. Okay, so we're gonna make some fresh cheese. I've got whole milk warming in a pot, and I've done this hundreds of times and I never get tired of it. This is like pure, simple, clean food chemistry. And pretty much every country in the world does some version of this. If there's cows and they're milking them, they're gonna have an abundance of milk and they're gonna wanna make some type of fresh cheese. So if we were, down south in Mexico, this would be called queso fresca. If we were in India, it would be paneer, and there's a little bit of a different process, but same idea. If we were in Greece, we're gonna make these curds and salt them and pack them, and we're gonna have feta cheese. In Italy, which is the country of the dish we're doing today, it's gonna be like a ricotta. And then in North America, we would call it farmer's cheese, cottage cheese, or fresh cheese. I like fresh cheese. It's not regionally specific. It's just the basic idea of a crumbly, non-stretchy, fresh cheese. So you can see I've got no thermometer in this right now, but essentially we want to bring it to just before a boil. This is bubbling a little bit, so if it gets to there, that's okay too. But basically we want to bring it up to 180 degrees if you have a thermometer, and then we're going to use some type of acid to split it into curds and whey. Okay, so you want to have a close look at this. Normally I would use in this recipe a little bit of buttermilk, but I don't have that today, so I'm just going to use straight apple cider vinegar. But in Mexico they might use lime juice. You could also use lemon juice or white wine vinegar. Probably not balsamic because it would give you the reaction, but it's going to turn it brown. Okay, so we're gonna have a look real close, and we're gonna watch the curds in the whey as they split. And it happens very quickly. And you can see the beautiful split there. And then we're gonna strain that out, salt it, flavor it, and this becomes one of our building blocks that then we can use to put in our cannelloni, to put in our tortellini, to put in our lasagna, to make into little appetizers. We can do whatever we want with it at that point. So we've warmed our milk, we've split it into our curds and whey, and now we're gonna strain it. We're going after the curds right now, but there's also plenty of applications for the whey. Back in the old days, probably what they would do and what I did on the farm when I was making cheese is I would mix this with the compost and feed it to the chickens or the pigs. It's very high in protein, and you can see that what we're after today is this fresh cheese here, which, like I said, becomes a building block for lots of different applications. So one of my favorite things is talking about deconstructing recipes and making building blocks that we may use for a particular recipe, but then once you know this building block, it's kind of part of your tool belt. It's something that you can apply to other things. And one of my favorite building blocks is brown butter. So brown butter is made by just taking butter and slowly cooking it so that the butter fat and the milk solids split. So essentially you're clarifying butter, or in Indian cuisine that you would be making ghee. Clarified butter has a way higher smoke point, but with brown butter what we're doing is instead of just taking out the butter fat, we're gonna leave the milk solids in to drop to the bottom and sort of tumble around and caramelize. And what that gives us is this beautiful, nutty, toasty, sweet, delicious butter with chunks of caramelly bits that then you can use to put on your popcorn, cook your pancakes, scramble your eggs, toast some sage in and use for pasta dishes or gnocchi as we're doing it today. You can take those little brown caramelized bits and put them into your custard to make ice cream. You can toss steamed veggies in brown butter to have this nutty depth that you wouldn't get with just regular butter. Anyway, the sky is the limit. It's a building block. We're gonna turn this on, come back and check in a minute. Okay, we're back with our brown butter, or at least our melted butter that we're browning. And you can see all the milk solids have frothed up to the top. And I just do this little shake. And right now they're frothy, but what's gonna happen is that they're gonna start to drop down to the bottom, and they're gonna do this little cycle where they're gonna start to caramelize. And what I want to do is I want to take my fresh sage leaves at this point and I want to add them in there. And then while the butter is browning, the sage leaves are actually going to be getting crispy. And essentially we're making sage confit. So anytime we're cooking something in fat and we're putting fat into where water once was in a food, that's essentially making a confit. And we're doing that with the sage. They're gonna be crispy and fully saturated in the butter and so delicious. And we're gonna make a marinara. So I'm gonna use whole plum tomatoes, whole organic Italian plum tomatoes. I'm gonna put some fennel seeds, some oregano, some basil, and some onions. We're gonna start out with a bit of olive oil. Get that nice and hot. Nice chunky garlic. We're just going to move that around in the fat. Get our onions going on in there. While that's searing up, we're going to take some fennel seeds and crush them in the mortar and pestle. And when making soups and sauces, I generally like to put anything that is a seed, like a spice, into the fat first. And then if it's an herb, I like to put it into the body of the sauce. So we're going to start with our fennel and put it right in with our searing onions and garlic. And we're gonna put a little bit of pepper in there as well. And already this is starting to smell delicious. We're not looking to caramelize these onions, we're just gonna soften them and sweat them off a bit. And this particular recipe I call the Pareno marinara, and I adapted this from an Italian woman that used to be a chef at one of my first restaurants. Her name was Angelina Pareno. I actually named my daughter after her because I loved her so much. And she said that I could use her family recipe. And she had told me this story about how her grandma made this. And she would use whole plum tomatoes and sit and chop each one by hand with a butter knife and a spoon. And I still do that. And I've actually made some of my chefs do that at one of my most recent restaurants. And then I would come in and find that they had used an immersion blender to blend them, and I could always tell, and I'd be like, chop them up by hand, because there's a different texture, there's like this randomness. So we're gonna add our plum tomatoes. And I'm gonna rinse the can and just add a little bit of water. And then I'm gonna go in using 2 spoons and just start the chopping process to get a beautifully random texture to our marinara. And then at this point, now that I've got the liquid in there, I'm going to add some dried oregano. You could use fresh as well. And some dried basil. And a pinch of salt. And we're going to stir that around and let that stew. Once again, marinara is a classic building block. We're going to use it for cannelloni today. This can be used for anything. Another one thing to add to your tool belt. Okay? So some more building blocks that we're going to work with are some caramelized onions, which is a classic favorite of mine. You can use in all sorts of different applications. What we're making right now is we're going to do a caramelized onion, leek, and mushroom duxelle, or kind of puree that we're going to put inside of a ravioli. But, you know, once you learn this process, again, on the tool belt, this is something that, you know, I really love to reference so that people don't get too attached to one particular recipe, but start to build their repertoire. And that's where it becomes like, you know, a painter's palette. And then once you have all these different colors that you know, paint your dishes with, you become a little more fluid in your execution, and your enjoyability in the kitchen just, you know, broadens and it just becomes a way more fun process, okay? So we're gonna do both mushrooms and onions at the same time. The onions and the leeks I'm gonna caramelize together. The mushrooms I'm gonna caramelize on their own. So we're starting with some butter. You can also do this with olive oil if you wanted to do a vegan version. I'm gonna put the mushrooms into the butter. I got a little bit of fresh thyme, a bit of white pepper, black pepper, ground nutmeg, and white wine. I'm going to add the onions to that beautiful butter. Add the leeks. And I'm going to just throw the whole thyme right in there, and then I'll fish out the branches later. So I generally start this out on high, but then we're gonna, depending on your stove, on your range, whether you have electric or gas, induction, you're gonna tweak the heat because you want to have this this caramelization happen, you know, sort of slowly, in that you're gonna brown the sugars as they come out of the food. So we don't want it to get too crispy too fast. So just have a look here. This is getting pretty hot, and you see the edges are starting to caramelize a bit. We want to spread the food out so that it doesn't just sweat on itself, and have a big enough pan that there's room for the caramelization to take place. I'm going to add a bit of salt. I'm going to go with some black pepper for the mushrooms, a bit of white pepper for the onions and leeks, and a little pinch of nutmeg as well. We're going to give those a minute, caramelize, and we'll come back and have a look in a moment. So this is all beautiful. I'm sure it looks good. You can hear my voice, but the one thing you can't pick up that maybe down the road we will infuse into the online and visual experience is what I'm smelling here right now. So this is one of the things that tells me when the brown butter is getting finished. You can kind of see through the froth, possibly. Anyway, there's little brown bits forming at the bottom, and there's just this beautiful smell of caramel happening. And you can see that it's a bit frothy to see through, so we'll check back a bit when it all settles, and then you'll be able to see the crispiness of the sage leaves and the toasty brown bits at the bottom of the butter. The mushrooms are a little further along, so we're going to hit those with a little bit of white wine. And we'll give the onions and leeks just a little bit more time to caramelize before we deglaze those. And now we'll hit these with some wine. So after we've deglazed with the wine, you can start to see that as it reduces down and dries out, you get just the essence of the wine. It turns into a syrup, and the sugars start to caramelize. And so you can see that Beautiful caramelization happening there. I'm gonna reach in and pull out my thyme sticks here. All the flavor is pulled out of there. You can see how crispy and delicious these mushrooms are. And we'll turn those off just to slow that process down a bit. And then we're gonna blend those up into a bit of a chunky paste that we're gonna put inside of our ravioli. So, all these techniques and everything aside, you know, one of the main components to cooking a mighty fine dish is making sure that it tastes delicious, okay? So we're gonna season it. We're gonna taste every bit. And if every component is well seasoned all the way leading up to the final dish, then you know that you're gonna have a delicious dish. So if you learn how to nail your building blocks and make them all good, then when you assemble them, they're gonna be fantastic. The only thing to watch out is not over seasoning each individual component so that when you put it together, the whole dish doesn't get overly seasoned in its entirety. And so the reason that I didn't cook the mushrooms and the onions and the leeks all together is because they tend to caramelize at different rates. And so if I put the mushrooms and the onions and the leeks all together, they end up sweating and getting just a different rate of caramelization. And I've done that to try to kind of speed up the process, and I'll always break my rules and then find out why not to and go back. So you can try it. But what I found is that doing leeks and onions together works, and doing mushrooms on the side works, and then I get a perfect caramelization on them both and then blend them. So that's why I've split them up like that. So one of my favorite tools in the kitchen, just for quick blitzing of stuff, is to use the immersion blender. And I'm going to use it for these mushrooms, onions, and leeks, and make a quick filling for our ravioli. I've seasoned each individual ingredient, so I don't really need to taste this final product, but I want to. It's one of my favorite things. Okay, so I'm going to transfer this into a bowl and just have it ready for when we go to make our ravioli. Now this alone, like I said, is a fantastic building block. This on crackers with cheese is amazing. It's a version of mushrooms on toast on baguettes with goat cheese, so good. You can also use this as a base for a salad. You can mix this into a vinaigrette and have a mushroom, leek, and caramelized onion vinaigrette. It goes all over the place. So once again, building blocks, caramelized onions, leeks, and mushrooms. Enjoy. So as you spend more and more time in the kitchen, you start to have more and more tools for assessing your final product. And that's an important part, because we don't nail things every time. And so I'm going to assess this brown butter with you, not as though it's perfect, but assessing my own brown butter in this moment, okay? So we can see all these little caramelized bits. And I'm going to say that they're probably, just the heat retention in this pan is so fantastic that in this particular case it kept cooking. So they're probably about 20% darker than what I like. Now they're still not going to be bitter. When they get black, then they become bitter. And some people actually even call this burnt butter, which I don't like that term because it implies, well, obviously that it's burnt. And if it's burnt, then I prefer not to use it because it is bitter. But you can see these beautiful little sage leaves, and they're so crispy they just crack up and become another delicious garnish, building block, and tasty addition to this brown butter. So delicious. So you can see how the tomatoes, those whole plum tomatoes I've chopped up, they've been stewing away in there, and they're soft and finished. So this is a beautiful textured marinara. We've got the onions, you can smell the fennel seeds and the basil and the oregano stewing in there. That's gonna be the perfect texture for our cannelloni. You can add water more or less depending on what it's being used for, if you want your sauce thinner or thicker. Okay, but that's finished for right now. Marinara, classic red sauce. So I've strained off the fresh cheese. I've let it hang to dry, and you can see that it's quite dry and crumbly now. And this is also a building block for lots of other cheeses, but for us, we're gonna use this as a filling for our cannelloni. We're gonna set that aside until we're ready for it. Okay, so we're gonna make a classic white sauce now. This is called a bechamel. And so I've got some milk steeping here with a bit of thyme and bay leaves, and it's been steeping for a bit, and I'm gonna strain out the ingredients that I've steeped in there. Once again, I wish you could smell this, because those bay leaves steeping in milk, I love that smell, it's so delicious. We want our milk when we're making our bechamel to be hot. When I opened my first restaurant, I was very young and not classically trained, and I used to make my bechamel with cold milk, and I would probably attribute that to why this one left bicep got huge in that year, because I was whisking for so long trying to get it to thicken. And then one of the guys that I hired came and he said, you know, if you do that with warm milk, it's a lot faster. And I was like, oh, and then I tried that and it's way faster. Okay, so we're gonna put butter in the pan, and we're gonna start by making a roux. A roux is a combination of butter and flour, and we use this to thicken things. So we're gonna melt the butter. And generally a roux is equal parts by weight butter and flour. And really, when you're making a roux, you want it to end up about the consistency of a loose Play-Doh. Sort of like that. And now at this point, just cooked like that, there's a couple things you can do. You can leave it as a blonde roux, which has the strongest thickening power. You want to cook the flour off a little bit, but as you toast it, it becomes nuttier and more delicious, but its thickening power reduces as you cook it more. So when it's a blonde roux, it thickens more but has less flavor, and it's sort of more floury. As you cook it off, it becomes toastier and has a little bit less thickening power. So at this stage, I'm going to hop over into a whisk and add a little bit of milk, and you see that furious boil. Now watch this, because bechamel is kind of like lava, and we want to really whisk that together to make it really thick before we add the rest of our milk. And then each stage we're going to whisk a little bit more so that it blends evenly. Into a very creamy, delicious texture, and then we're going to season it. You can see that we don't want to whisk too fast in the beginning, but then we want to really get in there and really whisk those lumps out until it's so creamy and delicious. Now this, you can also stir in any type of cheese and make a beautiful cheese sauce. You can use it to make regular soup a cream soup. You can pour it over steamed vegetables and add breadcrumbs and bake it as a gratin. There's an unlimited amount of things you can do with a bechamel as well. So I'm gonna add the rest of the milk and then whisk that all in, and then I'll season to taste. And once again, just whisking gently in the beginning, otherwise you're gonna splatter yourself with hot lava bechamel. And then as it gets more mixed up, you can get a little faster. Bechamel, just like I was saying with the marinara, you can make in a whole bunch of different textures, from very, very thin to very, very thick. For this particular one, I'm making a little thicker because it's to go on top of the cannelloni and be nice big fluffy clouds of bechamel. So I'm going to salt this. I'm going to also add a little bit of nutmeg, a little bit of white pepper. It already has the thyme and the bay leaves steeped into the milk. And then I'm going to give this a test, and I'm going to have our in-house French taste tester come and test it with me, because every bechamel should be taste tested by a beautiful French woman. Julie has a bowl of bechamel every day for breakfast. Okay, so that's done. We'll set that aside. Another classic building block. Mother red sauce, mother white sauce. Mix them together. You have a rosé. Have some fun. So we're back. I'm Chef Cosmo Means. We're gonna make a white wine tarragon cream sauce. When I was 19, I worked the line and kind of got my hot line chops at a place called Pagliacci's in Victoria, BC, that is an old, classic, staple institution in town. And I learned how to make cream sauce and work with fresh pasta, and it's something that's stuck with me since. So I gotta give a throwback to Pagliacci's for this one. This isn't the flavor profile that we used to do, but it's the reduction of heavy cream into this velvety, delicious sauce that pretty much, anyone that eats dairy can't resist. It's so delicious. So we're gonna start out, we're gonna add some olive oil. We're gonna get that heating. And chop up our garlic. And I like to keep my garlic fairly chunky so I can toast it, and then there's some variability in how it cooks. Okay, so we're gonna put that in there while I cut the onion. Let that start sizzling away. And actually, this particular style of cutting an onion, I learned from one of my first mentors in the kitchen, Ken Oswald, and he challenged me one day to an onion cutting challenge, and he cut 10 before I cut 3, and so then I bowed to him and learned his style, and this is it. So we're going to cut the onion in half, then we're going to do these cross cuts like this, and then we're going to cut up to 90 degrees and tip it over and then finish. Okay, very simple, but it cuts the entire onion. And he used to make soup every day, prep with that style. So we've got our garlic toasting up in there. Gonna add our onions. Just spread it all out in the pan to give it all some room, get some flavor going on. And then once again, we're gonna add things that can handle the heat, right? So I'm not gonna put my fresh herbs in, right? I got this beautiful tarragon. I don't wanna cook that off in the fat, but I do want to put in some chilies, some white pepper, some nutmeg. And then stir that all in. And we're going to bring that to the edge of caramelization. We don't want it to be all fully caramelized. We just want to have all the edges caramelized, the garlic toasty, take out some of the sharpness of the garlic and the onions and create some sweetness. And then we're going to deglaze with white wine. And one of the components when we're deglazing with white wine is to bring the wine down. My old chef John Hall used to say au sec, which I didn't know what it meant, but it's actually French for dry. Au sec, yeah. And so we want to bring it down till it's dry, so it's like syrupy. We don't want to have the body of all the liquid of the wine in there. We want just the essence of the wine. So we're going to add that. And we're going to wait. We're not going to add our cream until the wine has dried out, okay? It also tends to, when making a cream sauce, if you add the cream too soon with all the acid from the wine, it can also split the cream sauce at the end. So now you can see it's dry. We're going to add our heavy cream. And we're going to stay with this because heavy cream loves to bubble over, okay? So we're going to just watch it, make sure we stay with it. Okay, now while that's reducing, let's talk a little bit about tarragon. Tarragon is a beautiful herb that has very licoricey taste and smell to it. So I like using it in combination with fennel and basil and different things that also have this licoricey essence, but they all come at it from a bit of a different angle. So have a look at our cream now. See how it's rising up? And we're gonna watch it real close. Sometimes blow on it. Bring the bubbles down. Adjust the heat so that it doesn't bubble out of your pan. But we do want it to reduce. All of those bubbles, that's moisture escaping, so that's part of the reduction process. Okay, we want it to froth like that. I'm Chef Cosmo Means, and we're gonna get down with making gnocchi, which is one of my favorite, most delicious little potato dumplings, okay? So we're gonna start out by taking russet or baker potatoes and steaming them until you can pierce a knife all the way through with no resistance. And then this is cold, so I've cooled it off in the fridge. We wanna make sure that they're cold when we're getting started. I'm gonna peel these using the back of a spoon or the side of a spoon. So I steam these particular ones, but you can also bake them. And you can also boil them, but generally speaking, we want to not introduce any new water. So we want to keep the starch that's in there, but we like to use a russet or a baker's potato, not so that we don't start with a really starchy potato like a Yukon Gold that already has a lot of gooiness in it. And so once we have it boiled, or steamed, or baked, and skinned, we're gonna break it up into some workable chunks. And once we have it into some workable chunks, we're gonna use a tool called a potato ricer. We're gonna put a little bit in at a time, and then using two hands, we're gonna press it through. There's gonna be a little bit that comes up. We're gonna scoop that off and throw that back into the bottom. Take another chunk, maybe two, but not too much because it's actually kind of hard on your wrist to work it when it's full. Take that last little bit, throw it at the bottom, take some more, and continue until it's done. So now we've got our potato put through our potato ricer, and we're gonna add some parsley, some salt, and some flour, and that's all that's in it. You could add some other herbs. Some people add egg, that's a bit of a different style of gnocchi, but this particular one is just potato and flour and salt with an herb, parsley of choice. That into a ball, collect all the little bits. And we're going to knead it a little bit like a dough. We don't want to create too much gooiness, so we're not going to work it too much, but we do want it to stick together. All those little bits in there. So now we've made our gnocchi dough. We're gonna roll some gnocchi out and then cook some. I've got a pot of water on, really nicely salted at a rolling boil. I've got my gnocchi paddle, a spider or a slotted spoon would work fine, and a bench scraper. So we're going to cut a chunk to work with and roll it out. Putting our hands together like so, and as it lengthens, we'll spread our fingers apart. Until about there. We want to be fairly light. The dough's quite soft, and we want to have just a big enough piece that when it's fully rolled out, that our hands spread apart like that. If it gets too far out like that, it starts kind of flopping around. So now we're going to cut it into little gnocchi chunks. We're going to take our gnocchi paddle and flour it. I'm going to use this one, I like the tighter lines. And then we're going to press and roll our gnocchi off. So these paddles, what they're going to do is they're going to create some indents that are going to allow for what I like to call noodle or gnocchi sauce adhesion, right? So they're going to create some channels that the sauce can get caught in. And also by squishing it, we're going to make them cook a little bit faster. So we're going to press with our thumb, and then we're going to pinch them off. Okay? So we're going to press with our thumb and pinch them off. Press, pinch, or a little roll. Press, pinch, and a little roll. You can see the nice lines that it makes for our sauce to flow through. Now we're going to put our gnocchi into the boiling water, boiling salted water. We don't want to overcrowd it, so depending on how many you're going to cook, you want a bigger pot if you're going to put a whole bunch in. And we're going to use our spider to just make sure they're not sticking to the bottom. We don't want the boil to be too furious so that it agitates them too much. They're quite sensitive, right? So they're very delicate, and they could break apart if you didn't have quite enough flour in there. or if they stuck to the bottom and cooked for too long. So now they're gonna do this little dance where they're gonna start wanting to come to the top, and basically when a gnocchi floats, it's cooked. Okay, so you can see that these guys are dancing up, and they cook very fast. So those two, that one's done, those two are done, that guy's done. And I'm gonna put them on this plate. And we'll let those set up. I like to pull them out of the water and let them set a bit before adding them to the sauce, and it just allows them to settle and hold their shape a little bit better. Hi, I'm Chef Cosmo and I love making fresh noodles. So we've made a couple of different doughs already. We've made an egg pasta dough, a beet pasta dough, and a spinach pasta dough. Now we're gonna combine those three together in a tri-colored dough, and then I'm gonna show you a few different ways how you can cut up that dough. Okay, so let's take our dough. And this has been setting in the fridge, and it's a little sticky to touch, and we're gonna leave it that way while we're prepping for our tri-color dough, because we want the pieces to stick together. So we got our egg dough, our spinach dough, thank you, and our beet dough. And we want these all to be relatively the same texture as far as water content goes, so that they adhere. And when we roll them out, one doesn't squish out more or less than the others. Okay, so we're gonna kind of flatten them relatively the same. And we're gonna cherry pick from the center some strips, 2 strips from each color. And we're gonna reserve this bit for later, okay? Anything we're not using, we wanna cover, either with a damp towel or a piece of our saran wrap so that it doesn't dry out. Some nice lips, pasta lips. Okay, now we're gonna lace these together. We're gonna take 1 egg, 1 beet, 1 spinach, 2nd egg, 2nd beet, 2nd spinach. And I'm just gonna work those together a little bit. Flip it over, make sure it's stuck on the other side. Before I add any flour to this or start rolling it out, I really want to make sure that my pieces are stuck together. Okay, and once I see these seams are looking pretty good, right? They're not pulling apart at all. They're nice and stuck. Now I'm going to dust this whole thing with a bit of flour. And using a rolling pin, we're going to thin it out to the point where we can start working it through our pasta machine. We'll roll it even so it doesn't get too crooked. And then we'll thin out the very end, and I'll cut these little little fringles off so I get a nice even grab on that first grab through the machine. Just thinning out the end so it bites and pulls the rest in. Okay. So now we've got our pasta machine, which is just a fantastic tool, staple tool in my kitchen. And we've found some type of counter that we can use a C-clamp to attach it to. It's got to be probably no thicker than that. So our wooden block counters, you can't really attach it to. You may need to put it on a kitchen table. We want to make sure the whole thing is really fastened on there tightly. And then we've got this crank that goes into the side. We've got variable settings in thickness, starting at 0, and we want to start at the thickest setting and incrementally work down and thin out the dough. Okay? So we're going to start at 0 and then start dropping it down. Each time we're rolling it thinner and thinner, and the knob here we're just pulling out and doing a little turn to set it to the next consecutive setting there. And we just let it hang so that this lowest part grabs first and pulls the rest in. And we want to keep this light rather than making tension and stretching and bowing out the dough as it rolls through. One of the things to keep in mind with our roller too is that if it starts to roll in crooked, don't try to roll it back out because it'll just shove the dough into the mechanism of the machine. Okay, so now we've got this. This is on setting 3. This is looking beautiful. And we're just gonna flour it up so that it doesn't get too sticky and stick to the rollers. But this is looking beautiful. Okay, we're gonna go down to setting 4. Just let that lowest part grab first. We also want to handle it gently like this, hanging it rather than pinching and creating weak points, right? So we don't want to stretch and grab it like that and create a weak spot where it's going to break. We're going to go to 5. Okay, let it just pull its way in. You can see it starts to get quite long. You might need a friend to help you with this. Okay, so we brought it down to thickness 5. We're gonna run it through one more time and probably, I'll just assess, but we'll probably stop at 6. Okay, so we're gonna let that lowest point hang again and let it just pull itself through. Not putting too much tension on it as it pulls through. Okay, and that's feeling beautiful and amazing. So that is the beginning. That's our tricolor dough rolled out. And now we can cut it into whatever shapes of whatever type of pasta we want to use this for. We're gonna do some cannelloni sheets. We're gonna make some half moon raviolis. I might cut a few fettuccine noodles just to show you, maybe some spaghettini. And we're gonna do it all in this tricolored dough. So just because this is hanging off the edge, let's cut this piece and turn this into noodles. Okay? It's beautiful. We're gonna take our crank out and let's go with some nice thin noodles. So we're gonna hang that, just let that grab, and then we'll just have a look below and watch as this cuts our beautiful noodles. So that is a beautiful tri-colored noodle, which then we could dance around and dust with some flour so it doesn't stick together. We can make a nest. And you can always put flour on there to keep them from sticking together too much. And then the flour will cook off in the water. Okay, so there's some spaghettini. Next, we'll cut a few more noodles. The fettuccine. So once again, we're going to let that hang and grab and pull through. And we get a bit of a thicker noodle, which we can also hang if we want or make a nest. Okay, so now we're gonna cut a few things. So let's go some cannelloni sheets, which we're gonna wanna use a template and then keep cutting. So we're gonna go 1, 2, let's say we'll do 3 of these. All right, we want those to be all about the same size. Okay, so we wanna use one to make as a template for the next ones. And then we're gonna make some half moon raviolis using the filling that we made earlier with the caramelized mushroom, onions, and leeks. Okay, and we want to use some type of cutter. Could be a cup or a glass. We've got this hole cutter, and we're gonna take a cutting with an even amount of each color. So that's pretty like that. Okay, so we got our beautiful circle here, all 3 colors represented. We've got the spinach, the beet, and the egg. And then I've taken 1 egg with about half an eggshell's worth of water and whisk that together. And this is what I like to think of as glue. Okay, this is gonna hold this together. And we call it, or I call it glue, because we only want glue to be where we want glue to be. So we always wanna just dip our finger in the glue, dry it off so that we don't get it everywhere. So we're gonna take a little bit of this glue and we're gonna paint a smiley face on the bottom half of our circle. And then we're gonna dry our finger. Now we're gonna reach around and we're gonna grab our mushroom filling and take a little clump of that. We don't want too much so it squeezes out the edges and breaks the seal. Okay, want about like that. And then we're gonna fold that over, and as we do, just pinch out the air. Okay? And that's gonna be our half moon ravioli. We're also gonna take a fork and we're gonna crimp the edges, and we're gonna make a few of those. So, you know, with Italian cuisine and all these noodles, you know, it makes me think, like, what's the origin of these? And so I've also had some experience with some Polish friends and making pierogies, and then also had some friends that are from China that make wontons. And what I found is actually probably all of this, you know, has made its way down from China. And, you know, coming through Poland, it hit and became the pierogi, and then all the way into Italy and became the ravioli and the tortellini. And when I kind of stumbled upon this, I'm sure this is written somewhere, but I stumbled upon it by having a Chinese neighbor who used to come over and get us to make wontons for her and feed us a little bit of lunch, but basically get me and my 4 roommates to make like hundreds of wontons for her, and then she would feed us 20 of them and take them back to her house. And I actually learned to make a wonton before a tortellini, and then when I was showed how to make a tortellini, I was like, that's pretty much exactly like a wonton. So I'll show you that as well. We'll take a half moon ravioli, which is the beginning, and we're gonna put a little bit of our glue on that side. And then if we roll it around our finger and then just fold it down, you know, with a bit of a different shape, rather than round, we cut a square for the wonton and fill it with pork and green onion and ginger, but essentially a tortellini and a wonton are very, very similar. And we have this nice hole in the center so that it allows the water to go in and cook the thicker parts of the noodle. So that's what we want with a tortellini. And then with our half moon raviolis, just for aesthetics and to help crimp it down a bit, we're gonna use a fork and crimp those edges and get those ready for the pot. Okay, so that's our half moon ravioli. Let's cook them up. So I've got our beautiful tricolored cannelloni sheets that we just rolled out. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn these from a sheet of dough into a noodle. And we're gonna do that by cooking it for approximately 2 minutes. And I like to do this even though it's not necessary, so that we don't have the flour cook off in the sauce. Some people don't turn it into a noodle. I like to turn it into a noodle and then build my lasagna or cannelloni with a noodle, and it keeps the dish a lot cleaner. Okay, so we're gonna put that into our salted boiling water. And we're gonna turn these into noodles. And this literally takes a minute or 2, okay, depending how thick it is. And you can see that once we cook off that bit of flour, we get that beautiful color. Now we're gonna turn these ones into cannelloni, so that's, we're not gonna see that quite as much, but in our ravioli, we'll see that. It's beautiful. So I'm gonna fish these out of here, and I've laid out a cloth that I'm gonna put them on, and as soon as they're cool enough to touch, I'll flatten them out and then let them set a bit and form a bit of a skin so they're not so sticky to work with. And we want to do it when they're, well, cool enough to sort of touch, but also not leave them for so long that they stick together. Okay, so we're going to just flatten them out best we can, as soon as we can. And then let them dry on here and form a bit of a skin. Okay. So when we're cooking our gnocchi, they float when they're done. When we're doing our ravioli, we want to time them. So generally what we're going to do is we're going to cook one from a particular batch, and we're going to pull it out somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes, and we're going to test it. And then once we know that that is where, you know, to our liking, then we're going to cook the whole batch at that rate. And once we have, you know, a bunch of raviolis like this, we can make enough for dinner, but we can also make enough to freeze for later. So you can put them on a baking sheet or a plate and put them into the freezer like this, pop them off, and gently have them in a bag, and then just cook them straight from frozen, and they'll likely add another minute to the cooking time. Okay, so once again, you could cook one, test it, cook the rest for that particular dinner at that same rate. So we're just finishing off our white wine tarragon cream sauce. You can see those tight bubbles, and this is the point when you don't want to rush it. You really want to season your dish and make sure it's right where you want it. Okay, so we're gonna give this a couple of tastes. I like to try and do as much with my nose as I possibly can. When I opened my first restaurant, I would taste things so much that it would irritate my mouth. And so I tried to have this rule where I could only use 3 spoons and I'd smell everything I could and try to get as much flavoring through my nose and then just taste for salt, sugar, and acid. Oh, that's so good. Okay, we'll just do a little pinch of salt. Work that in. Okay, and we can see those nice bubbles. You can see that beautiful creamy texture. That was our timer for our noodles, so we're right on time. I'm gonna spoon this into the bowl. And you can toss your noodles in this as well. You can toss your ravioli, but for right now we've got this beautiful tricolor. I'm gonna lift them out and set them on top, and then we can mix it in as needed. So we're gonna reach in and pull out our beautiful tricolor ravioli. I'm gonna dust them with just a smidge of salt. Make sure they're not carrying a bunch of water. And we're gonna put those right on top. And then we're gonna take some tarragon and we're gonna lay that over. And then I'm gonna finish with just a little bit of pepper. And there's our tri-colored ravioli with a white wine tarragon cream sauce. So we made our tri-colored dough. We've cooked off our noodles. We've made our fresh cheese. We've steamed, squozen, and chopped our spinach. There's parsley, Parmesan, mozzarella. We have our marinara that we made. We have our so thick and creamy and delicious bechamel. Now we're gonna assemble a cannelloni, okay? So we're gonna start by making the filling. We're gonna take our fresh cheese. We're gonna add our spinach. We're gonna add some Parmesan, parsley, and you can do this filling with pretty much anything. This one's gonna be a spinach and cheese, and I'm gonna use some of the filling from the ravioli. Let's use all of it. You can also do this with chicken, with Italian sausage, pork, with beef, with whatever type of filling you want, right? So we're gonna do this one for now. We're gonna mix this all together. And depending on the texture of it, sometimes we'll add an egg. So what I'm gonna do is add just a little bit of our leftover glue from earlier, which is just a little bit of egg, just to bind it together a bit. And then we'll mix that all together. Now we could salt this just a bit, but also the mushrooms, leeks, and onions were quite well salted. So that's gonna be delicious like that. You can feel when it just pushes together like that and it's gonna hold its shape, then that's a good texture. No matter what you're working with, you wanna have that texture there. So now we're gonna take our sheets that we've let dry, and they're still a little sticky, but they're workable, okay? So we're gonna just slice them in half. That's why we want the template, so that they end up the same size, okay? So we're gonna just leave those sitting there for a minute while we prepare our dish. We've got a baking dish here. We're gonna take our marinara and make a layer on the bottom. Just a nice moist layer on the bottom. And we're gonna take our filling, and it's a bit more than you would think. Okay, maybe a little less than that. We wanna make one full turn. We wanna pack it right to the edge so it really fills it up. Okay, and then we're gonna make one full turn. Okay. Then we're gonna do another one. Right to the edge. And then make that full turn. And then fold side down and have them nice and snug. And then we're gonna fill up the tray, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're gonna put the cheese on top. So now we've got all our cannelloni nestled, tightly nestled in our baking dish. We're gonna take a bit more marinara, and using the back of the spoon, just coax it into all the crevices. Okay, just smearing it in there. So we're just gonna fill in all these crevices and empty spots, just using the back of the spoon, smearing it flat. Then we're gonna take our mozzarella. This is not my lowest fat dish, but man, is it good. Just gonna cover that. This happens to be just exactly enough. And then we're gonna hit it with a little bit of sharp cheese, a little bit of Parmesan, a little leftover parsley just because we have it. And then we're gonna put these little fluffy pillows of bechamel, this nice thick bechamel that's gonna puff up as it cooks and be a totally unnecessary but delicious addition to this cannelloni. Okay. And then we'll fire that in the oven for about 25 minutes at 375. Okay, we've browned our butter, toasted our sage, made and cooked our gnocchi. Now we're gonna assemble a very simple and yet delicious brown butter with toasted sage and gnocchi. So we're gonna put some of that brown butter in our pan. And I use salted butter for this, because when you brown unsalted butter, it's very difficult to stir the salt in because salt isn't fat soluble. So you just end up with granular chunks of salt, whereas when you use salted butter, then the whole dish becomes just a sweet and salty combination. So we're gonna put our gnocchi in there. Just roll them all around in that brown butter. Fry them up. Now you can serve this with anything. Sometimes I like a little bit of squash and radicchio, a little sweet and bitter. Sometimes asparagus. But right now we're just gonna have the straight brown butter gnocchi with toasted sage. So you have a couple tones of green in there. And there's our brown butter gnocchi and sage. So good. I love this dish. So you can see our beautiful fluffy bechamel clouds have all crisped up on top. And we've got this beautiful ring of sizzling cheese around the outside. This looks so delicious. And when we use the back of the spoon and a chunky marinara like that, and we just put just enough sauce in to coat everything, but not too much, we end up with a beautiful cannelloni or lasagna that holds its shape on the plate. It doesn't just flop over and is very saucy and kind of gushes everywhere. So normally with a cannelloni, or lasagna for that matter, when you pull it out of the oven, you're gonna wanna let it set for about 15 or 20 minutes, and it just becomes easier to cut. It's not so sloppy. So I'm just gonna show you how this one, we're gonna dig into right away. I'm just gonna loosen that crispy cheese on the edge. See how beautifully that holds its shape, even straight, fresh out of the oven. And there's our cannelloni, stuffed with fresh cheese, spinach, mushrooms, caramelized leek, and caramelized onion. So there's the entire pasta fundamentals class, all the dishes laid out. We're changing this up, so this one's going into the archives, and I'm glad that we're filming this because this has been a class favorite for a number of years now. So we're gonna go through, and we've got our tri-colored ravioli in a white wine tarragon cream sauce, and I have to have a bite of this. I've been waiting too long. So good. Next we've got our brown butter gnocchi with toasted sage. Our cannelloni stuffed with fresh cheese, spinach, mushrooms, caramelized onions, and leek. Thank you very much. Chef Cosmo means cook culture. Happy cooking.